What's up, my fellow Shield Brothers? Shield Brother 6 here with your weekly dose of history on this fabulous Thursday. As you can see, I'm back in my fabulous dorm room, and today we will be talking about the end of King Louis XVI and the beginning of the French Revolution, January 9th, 1793, and how this would affect the entire world. King Louis is depicted bottom left there with the royal flag and royal crest of France at the time. Let's get started. Louis XVI. Louis XVI was the last king of the classic French monarchy, 1774 to 1792, in the line of the Bourbon monarchs, preceding the French Revolution of 1789. Although Louis XVIII, his younger brother, rules when the monarchy is restored after his family is killed, 1814, after Napoleon. Louis XVI became the heir to the throne and the last Bourbon king of France upon his father's death in 1765. In 1770, he married Austrian Archduchess Marie Antoinette, the daughter of Maria Theresa and Holy Roman Emperor Francis I. After a variety of governing missteps, Louis XVI brought the French Revolution crashing down upon himself, and in 1793 he was finally executed. He was tried by the French Convention, found guilty of treason, and sentenced to the guillotine January 19, 1793. Louis is depicted bottom right there. The background of the revolution. By 1789, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. In May of that year, Louis XVI convened the Estates Generales, an advisory assembly of different estates or socioeconomic classes consisting of the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners. By June, the Third Estate, the commoners, declared itself the National Assembly, aligned with the bourgeois, and set out to develop a constitution. Initially, Louis XVI resisted, declaring the assembly null and void, and called out the army to restore order. Public dissension grew rapidly, and a National Guard was formed to resist the king's actions. By July 1789, he was forced to acknowledge the National Assembly's authority, although. In July 14th, riots broke out in Paris and other towns, and crowds stormed the Bastille prison in a show of defiance toward the king, depicted bottom right. The trial. In December 1792, the National Convention placed the deposed Louis XVI on trial, depicted right there. The former king was presented with 33 charges, each describing an act of betrayal, sabotage, or failure of government. After weeks of testimony, legal argument, and deliberation, all 693 of the National Convention's deputies voted in favor of the king's guilt. The subsequent votes condemned him to execution without the right of legal appeal or an appeal to the people. On January 21st, 1793, Citizen Louis Capet, as he was then officially known, was carted to the guillotine and decapitated before thousands of his former supporters and subjects. The significance of this. The trial and execution of Louis XVI caused a sensation across France and around the world. Kings had been assassinated, even overthrown, and toppled by military defeat, but for a reigning monarch to be tried and executed in public by his own people was almost unparalleled, except for England's Charles I, beheaded in 1649 being a noticeable exception, which I did in fact make a video about him storming Commons a couple weeks ago. If you want to go check that out, if you haven't already, I will leave a link in the description so you can check that out. This trial would also be the beginning of the bloody long tidal wave called the First French Revolution. Noteworthy exceptions. In the few days available to him, Louis assembled a defense team containing some of France's best lawyers, including the gifted orator Raymond de Sisy, François Tronchet, who had interrogated Louis after his arrest at Varennes, and Guillaume Marchabez, the retired jurist and former Minister of State. Sorry for butchering those French names. These men prepared the king's defense with skill and delivered it with vigor, in spite of the dangers to their careers and their own lives, which I've always found fascinating, that these average men who had no love of the monarch would sacrifice and risk so much that he might get a fair trial, or at least attempt to get him a fair trial. And you can see them working out what he's going to say bottom right there. The regicide. The king's defense failed, ultimately, and all 693 of the National Convention's deputies voted in favor of the king's guilt. On August 13, 1792, Marie Antoinette began a captivity that was only to end with her death. She was jailed in various Parisian prisons. After a number of unsuccessful attempts, Marie Antoinette appeared before the Revolutionary Tribunal. You can see her in prison and at the guillotine, bottom right. She was charged with aiding the enemy and inciting civil war within France. The tribunal found her guilty and condemned her to death. On October 16, 1793, she was sent to the guillotine. Marie Antoinette aroused sympathy and pride by her dignity and courage in prison and before the executioner, even stirring some hesitance and reluctance by the executioner and citizens at her trial and execution. The world effects. The execution of Louis XVI reverberated around the entire world. In Britain, there was a scathing response to the king's guillotining. The London press, which by 1792 had written off the revolution as a descent into anarchy, painted the king's execution as a needless act of regicide, while the bloodthirsty sans-culottes rejoiced. 4 days after Louis' death, Britain expelled the French ambassador. The National Convention responded by declaring war on England on February 1st. The Russian Empress Catherine the Great also broke off diplomatic relations with France, while the rulers of Austria and Prussia ordered a significant escalation in military action against revolutionary France. In the United States, a nation which had won its independence with the support of the dead king, the reaction was more restrained. Americans mourned the death of Louis the Man, but they did not mourn the death of his monarchy. Some radical American journalists went as far as suggesting that the former king had betrayed his people and had gotten what he deserved. The French Revolution continued. The revolution would continue until roughly October 5th, 1795, where it would finally be dispersed due to the young general Napoleon Bonaparte, depicted bottom right, leading to much more conflict and turmoil under Napoleon's reign as emperor in the new French Empire and the Napoleonic Wars. The rebirth. And thus, with the end of this, France started its long, hard journey of redemption and rebirth. Through many empires, kingdoms, duchies, and eventually even Vichy France, and today, France has struggled and still struggles as it just proceeds through life. And though Louis XVI ended, France was just getting started, as this great nation would rise and fall once again, and again, and again, until it is finally where it is at today. Thank you for watching. As always, this has been Shield Brother 6 with your weekly dose of history. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you even learned something. If you like, please leave a dislike. If you don't like, please leave a dislike. If you want to leave a comment or suggestion, please leave a comment. And as always, I'll catch you next time.